Five, theoretically. I would like to remind my audience that YouTube is fucking stupid, and they removed the ability to preview a stream, so I have to test my audio and make sure it's looking good here right now. Alright, cool, yeah. Um, so, with that being said, and after I clapped loudly directly into the microphone, um, let me introduce the topic and sort of the general vibe. I want to start getting people who've worked in the public school system on this channel to discuss why it sucks so much ass. And the general, like, tone of this, I hate school. I have a very conspiratorial attitude about school. And, I believe it to be the indoctrination that leads people into the cult of what amounts to friendly fascism. I believe from my interactions with my guest that she agrees with this, and she is regularly stirring shit on Twitter, telling people that the information they have is wrong and they were taught wrong and they should learn better. But we got into a conversation the other day, and she told me that she is a former public school teacher, and that she regrets it. But like she has to, like she regrets this, that she has to sort of admit that she wouldn't recommend people to do it anymore. So I thought that was an interesting comment. It was sort of like, in one of the group messages, and I wanted to like get her on to elaborate a little bit further in that regard. So with that being said, I'm going to share this to the group messages while my guest introduces herself. This is Allie. You can feel free to let people know who you are and sort of what let you into teaching in general.
Yeah, so I'm like in a completely different field now, but originally I had no idea in high school like what I wanted to do for a living. And it very much is pushed on you, especially within like the millennials and past, to go to college. If you don't go to college, you're not going to do anything with your life. And I was always good, like I babysat a lot, and I was always good with kids and like teaching them things, like doing homework with like the kids I babysat and all of that. So it was like, oh, you'd be a great teacher. And I didn't know what else to do. So that's why I went into college for a teaching degree, which I did my degree in New Jersey. So a lot of this information might vary from state to state. So
Yeah,
just
for
an
sure.
FYI on that. Yeah. So yeah, and that's just kind of why. And I just like, and the reason that I ended up getting out of it too, it like had nothing to do with the kids because they were like fun and you do get a lot out of, I think, interacting and teaching things. However, like the administration and the school system and like all the politics involved in it are just like awful.
Yeah.
And it props up a lot of bad teachers, right? Because like, that wonderful thing called tenure, I'm saying that sarcastically.
Well, and one could even say that
Where,
it props up
yeah,
non-teachers, because I would say a teacher has
yeah,
to be a good teacher by definition, or they're not actually teaching anything.
right, right. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, really is no incentive for people to go above and beyond, especially after you get like tenured, which is for the state I was in was like 3 years and a day. Because I saw a lot of like older teachers, like once they get that, they start slacking on what they're doing and they aren't like as interested in coming up with like good ideas, different ways to teach things, because not every kid's going to read something on a page and understand it. Some kids are more like physical learners, which is why, I think the classroom in general is just like a bad place because most of it is like you sit down, you do your work. Like there's a lot of sitting throughout the day. There really isn't a lot of activity. I mean, you can make some activities, but you're definitely like more restricted on what you can do because you have to teach certain things because the state has standards that you have to for each grade, which are like, good luck remembering all that. Most people have that, bookmarks because there are so many of them. You're not going to remember everything that you're supposed to teach. And every lesson you have to tie to a standard and then turn that in to the principal or whoever in your school will do it. But like we usually turn them into the principal and they have to approve what you're doing.
And the standards
So it's all very
suck.
regimented. Yeah. Oh, they're absolutely awful. And it's like there are so many things that like are taught or supposed to be taught that not every kid is going to end up using that. And it's not necessarily like a good tool if it's not going to be something that later on they're going to go down that road. However, since they're trying to push everybody towards like college, and there are definitely people who will end up with different children, like if they express interest in something that's not like college oriented, a lot of the times in public schools that's kind of like talked down and they try and get them on the track to something else.
Talked down is a nice way of putting it. I
Anyway.
would say more like beaten into the dirt.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I understand that like they need people to succeed in the
Mm-hmm.
capitalist world in order to like fulfill their whatever standards, but like,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many applications for things that are like more creative that I think ultimately that sort of stifles people's ability to get a job that would be good that they like. So it's always been a peeve of mine, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and a lot of excuse me, teaching with all the standardized tests that you have to take on a yearly basis, it's like a lot of it ends up being teaching to that test,
Right.
which are ridiculous anyway. And you have to get a certain proficiency in your school district, um, or else you're punished. If you, I think it's like 70% or something, which if you consider how many kids are in public school, that's actually kind of high, that many. And if you consider how horrible those tests actually are. And that's the one thing that really kind of bothered me, was that in the state of New Jersey anyway, if you, so you have a script that you have to read off and say like a kid doesn't understand the wording of that script. Well, if the state person who's there like representing them, because there is somebody who will make sure that like, because you have there, it's very regimented like how you have to like hand it out, and you're responsible for any of them that are missing, and that becomes a big problem. But like if you say something other than what that script says, you could potentially like they lose your teaching license over words, which is
Right.
frustrating because like you can't really help any of the kids, and it's like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of what you're supposed to be there for,
Well,
in my opinion.
what you're supposed to be there
Yeah.
for, but not what they suppose you're supposed to be there for. Yeah.
Right, right.
So you got into teaching to like actually help kids. Like, was there like
Yeah.
was did you already sort of perceive a deficit in that regard that you could maybe work to fill in, or did you have more like you saw the profession, you saw that it was something you wanted to do and you wanted to meet the existing standards? Was it more of the prior or the latter?
I think it was probably more of the prior, because it wasn't, because I even like growing up, which is kind of funny, I didn't really like school that much, like
I
at
wonder
all.
why.
So, well, because a lot of the times I would get super bored and not pay attention, and which is part of me, but like it's also part of like the curriculum is like, oh, well, you have to like they beat into you, like this is what you have to learn. And it's like, well, this isn't helping me. Like, I'm not learning anything. So I would just like kind of daydream half the time. But also, I mean, there's also, I didn't really, like, I had friends too, but like, there were also people, like, you would see people get bullied and nothing being done about it. I mean, which is absolutely awful, you know,
Yeah.
or get made fun of. And like, or like, if you do something, if somebody's making fun of you and you do something about it that the school doesn't like, you get in trouble, even though you're not the one who started it.
Right,
Like,
because it doesn't matter who started it. What matters is that we crush it like every single
yeah,
time. Yeah.
right, right. So yeah, and I just wasn't interested in a lot of the topics that they were teaching, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like history. So I do have so my degree is in elementary education with a special ed endorsement too that I added on because I thought like the quote unquote like, you know, problematic kids were more fun.
Yeah.
And obviously I don't think they're problematic, but you know, but like they were more of a challenge for me, and that's like I think I kind of related more to them on a level from like what it was like growing up in schooling, you know, because I went to public school my entire life.
Right.
So
Yeah, same. Like so the deficit that you saw was more like experiential, right?
yeah, right. Yes.
So, I mean, in terms of that experiential deficit, what do you think your teachers could have done to improve your life?
Well, I think a lot of it to improve my life would have been Well, first of all, being more, and I think it is a little bit more directed, like when I went to school, and when I taught, in trying to differentiate like lessons and all of that type of thing. And when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing at all. Just in terms of having different learners, I think having a smaller classroom size to where you can actually get to know every kid and know, what's going on in their life, because sometimes like they might have some stuff at home that's going on and it's like, oh, well, who cares? You failed the test anyway, like.
Yeah, this depersonalized sort of like
growing up.
symposium style and sized classrooms do not work.
Yeah, no. And it leaves like a lot of kids, I think, with different deficits in subjects, whether you think they should be taught or not, but it does. Like, and a lot of people's like home life and everything around them kind of does impact their learning. Like if a kid comes into school and they're hungry, that might impact like their actual attention span.
Or if
so I
they've
know,
got
like, when I was a teacher.
Go ahead, sorry.
Good. So I was gonna say, so when I was a teacher, like something that I would do is I'd always have something like different snacks or something. So like if somebody did come in, maybe they didn't have breakfast that morning, but in some schools, you're not allowed to eat in the classroom. You're not allowed to drink in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's like very, yeah.
and of course, like there's a certain, I remember reading multiple scientific papers that it actually helps you to more thoroughly digest your food and to focus on what you're doing if you vaguely graze for long periods of time, especially
Right.
developing. So I mean, okay, so and that's to be honest, just to personalize this, that's a part of this subject that really hits me, because I didn't know I was bipolar till I was an adult. I didn't know I was hypermetabolic until I was like pretty close to an adult. And both of those things impacted my ability to exist in the normal world, right?
Right.
So in that regard, like when the school system would have me on this sugary bullshit, right? And then when I crashed, blame me for being tired in class and act like I was and then put PE in the middle of the fucking day. That makes no sense for anybody, Like PE should always be the last class. So I've got a bunch of gripes with the school system, but not the least of which is the way they treat normal child development. They make you get up ass early, chug a bunch of carbs, and then they expect you to perform well under these circumstances. I read a paper that said that it was like torture to wake up as early as schools make people wake up, and that it was also like torture to only eat certain things because your microbiome starts to give you psychological problems. But they don't give a fuck about that. They're standardized.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, it's like going back to like every kid is different. Like even with food, like people process things different ways. So like what they're giving kids, first of all, isn't necessarily like super healthy to begin with, but especially for maybe if somebody has like a specific diet or whatnot. So
yeah.
But I do think there's also something to the fact that like when children are like somewhat hyperactive, like even if it's something else, like maybe they have like a red dye allergy or something that makes them that way or whatnot. Because I did know a kid who did have that. Like I taught a kid who had that issue, but like they'll try and push drugs at them too for like attention deficit disorder, like or ADHD, whichever one. So. And that actually also happened to my nephew, that they tried to push him toward, which is why my sister left public school and took him to private school, was because he wasn't acting correctly. So they wanted to push to get him on medication. So, and he's like not the only kid that's done that.
Hey kids, you want some fucking meth?
Yeah.
We'll give you some meth or maybe some meth sister products. We've got plenty of meth. We're school is where you meth out. Okay. In that regard, how would you respond when the administration and other teachers were treating a kid that you knew had problems differently than you knew they needed to be treated?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be trying to talk to them, at least, like trying to talk to like the administration and the other teacher would be like, hey, like that, maybe you should lighten up because of X, Y, or Z. But the other thing is like, who's really going to listen to you if they don't want to? And there wasn't really like a ton of recourse to like short of them like actually hitting a kid or something like that.
Yeah.
And it would turn into kind of like your word versus theirs, unless there was like an aide in the classroom or something like that. And a lot of times aides are not paid well enough to actually like be like, hey, I'm not putting my neck on the line. Because I actually like there was one teacher that I worked with who it still bothers me to this day, because the child was diagnosed with a behavioral disability. And I think a lot of it came from probably his home life as opposed to actually having that diagnosis, but that's another thing. And it was really a shame because this one teacher would like push him, and it's almost like she didn't really like him. So she would try and push him to like some limit so that he got thrown out of the classroom. And it's like, I don't know, like that experience still bothers me to this day. Like, yeah.
Yeah, well, and especially knowing that, like, if they do have performance issues in your class, it could be related to the performance issues that they have gained because of other teachers and their other teaching styles, which are sometimes, again,
Right.
not teaching at all.
Right.
So,
yeah, I would agree with that.
So ultimately, you had severe problems with well, I mean, I shouldn't phrase it that way. They had severe problems that you were noticing, and it sort of removed your ability to appreciate the job for what it was.
I would say so, yes. And it's a kind of a stressful environment when like you're trying to do what's best for your students, but at the same time, it's like you only have so much leeway in the classroom. And you also have to please like the administration if you want to stick around.
Right. You got to kiss their ass.
When you're in your first, yeah. Well, especially when you're in your first few years too, because it's like, if you don't have tenure, like your ass is on the line even more. And if you make waves, like it's not going to go over well.
Yeah, especially since you're threatening their standardization, which means that they don't want to raise their standards to your level. They want you to lower yours until it fits in the box, sort of like, how school works.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, and they also have, and something else that was annoying that I guess I can bring up too is there are different, I guess, like programs that they have that they bring in from whatever company they decided to go with. And you have to teach that program even if it doesn't like make sense. So like Common Core or whatever. And like if you don't, and if the kid doesn't understand it that way, like they still have to do it because that's what we're doing,
Yeah, because fuck them.
And they get points taken off. Yeah, because they get points taken off for not doing it. Like even if they come up with the right answer somehow, you still get points taken off because you didn't do it the right way. Like, so that was something else that used to bother me a lot too. Like, yeah. I mean, I think it's ridiculous because not everybody's going to learn the same way, and not everyone's going to be able. That's not going to make sense to every single person.
For sure, especially since like that home life thing, that development thing, kids.
Yeah.
No matter what the media tried, and no matter what the government tried by getting parents to irresponsibly fuck, which is an entirely different subject, so that they would, produce a whole lot of children that they didn't have the time or energy for, so they'd be over at a government job or a government-approved job so that they couldn't properly raise them to begin with, and so that they would shove their kids in front of devices and into government daycare facilities known as indoctrination centers, known as schools. No matter what the government did in this regard to create, like, what amounts to a tax cattle idle populace, we ended up with a diverse array of children anyway, and they still want them to fit in this nice, neat little category that they can control.
Right.
So, I mean, in that regard, it's like what they want to do is they want to take the system that they've created and blame the flaws on the kids and then take it out on them.
Yep, and it's not fair, like, at all. But, I mean, in this, like when you're going to school to be a teacher too, there's a course, at least at the college I went to, where it's like trends in American education. And it's like anytime something happens, it's always the kid's fault. So like now we need to have stricter Whether it's like focusing more on math and science at one point was a big thing because like, oh, our kids are dumb and now they need to learn more math and science. Like, so, and like with each change in the school system, a lot of times it comes down to like blaming it on the kids, like you said, and, their inability, but it's like, really, it's just like the system that sucks entirely. Like,
Right, like that
so.
that old bad mentality that there are bad kids. No, they're just bad parents and bad
Mm-hmm.
adults. Kids, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a song by Ministry called "So What." I don't know if you like that song, but I fucking love it because it's a song that sort of takes the point of view of spree killers, and in that song, one of the lines that's read by like an old timey narrator is like, "Adults create the
Mm-hmm.
world children live in. Juvenile delinquency is always rooted in adult delinquency," and I fucking love that line. It's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like it doesn't like a lot of things too when it comes to like kids, whether it be like with parents or schools or whatever, the consequences to their quote unquote actions like don't totally make sense. Like they're not natural consequences or whatever. They're just like completely unrelated. Which is a whole nother, I guess, thing you can talk about, but
Well, I mean, that's I
I don't
think part
yeah.
of the problem in like the key structures. Like if you
Yeah.
talk about like consequences that don't fit the actual like thing, um I
Hmm.
think fundamentally one of the primary uses of school is not to teach arithmetic or English or history, but to teach people
Hmm.
conformity. Conformity being the key lesson of the public schooling system. And I think like when it comes down to it, that's why they do group punishments. That's why if one kid acts up, the entire class gets punished. Or if one kid does
Hmm.
something, quote, wrong, there's new rules, new standards, things get curtailed. Because they want that peer pressure, despite um, countless scientific papers saying that this peer pressure causes immune issues, fucked up
Hmm.
psychology, intimacy issues, and a host of other things because you're fucking with kids.
Hmm.
How much of that did you see?
Um, Hang on a second. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I lost my train of
Just
thought.
basically group punishment. How much of that did you see?
Oh, group. Yeah, I mean, it would happen all the time. Like if somebody was acting up, it's like, whether they're in PE, it's like, okay, well, you're acting up now. Everybody has to sit down for 5 minutes. The whole group is being punished for basically like one person like doing something, or yeah, if somebody's being disruptive, everybody kind of has to be quiet or whatever for X amount of time, or nobody gets to, or something else that would happen. Um, with that, and as well as in because I did work in Latchkey as well, which is a before and after school program, and that would happen really often too. Is that like one person doesn't listen, so like so everybody has to be reprimanded in some way, whether that's taking away an activity, like, oh, you guys can't go to lunch now, or whatever. You have to sit in the classroom for lunch while you work or something, um, just like that type of stuff. Um,
Yeah. Well, and in that regard, see, this is the thing. Schools are organized extremely similarly to prisons. And if you
right.
look at classrooms as prison blocks, and different
Mm-hmm.
elements of the school as prison elements, it starts to make a fuck ton more sense.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, they started to, and I think we're similar age group, but I'm not sure. Um, but when I was growing up, they started to install cameras, which was apparently odd. Like
Mm-hmm.
these things had never been there before. I was like middle school, and they started to install cameras everywhere. These cameras would watch you at every single corner of the school, every single second of the day. These schools
Mm-hmm.
were built with like cinder blocks and fences with like razor wire on the top. And it was weirdly prison like, and I couldn't get over that. And it was one of the things that made me hate the school in ways that I can't
Mm-hmm.
talk about on YouTube. But like the
Yeah.
general environment, I think, causes a lot more people to quote act out, because when you cage somebody, they want to resist the cage. It's a natural thing, wouldn't you say?
I would say so, yeah. And with like, and the funny thing is too, like when they would like we had cameras as well. In the school I worked in, we also did, and in the school I went to school in. But they would always frame it as like, well, this is for your benefit, too, like just so that we can, see what's going on. Like they frame it in a way, and I guess it's kind of the same with like anything that's government run, where it's like, oh well, this is for your safety, even though it like sucks, like,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, so
But yeah, I mean, I think it's natural, especially when kids are younger. It's like they need to get up and out and do things. So if you're taking recess away because that's the 1 hour a day they get to go run around and scream outside, like, or in the gym, whatever, depending on how cold it is. Like,
right. Well, and so
they're not meant to sit there for long periods of time.
Right. Well, and also like they're finding out more and more that long periods of sitting causes like physical problems. So like literally they shouldn't do that. Like so in that regard then, I sort of view schools as a microcosm for the rest of life because I see this. I started my journey into libertarianism and anarchism with like conspiracy theories, and one of the conspiracy theories that made a fuck of sense to me was the prison planet theory, where all our houses and rooms and etc. they're all just cells in a big prison. We've got our limited freedom, but it's our freedom to act within this centrally managed panopticon, and they have to train us from a very young age to accept that, or there might be some nebulous consequence in the future. I think like schools are a key part of that. And it's one of the reasons I'm anti-school already. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would make sense because once you're done schooling, most office jobs or like most jobs that people will go into kind of are just like the same thing. Like you're on a computer or like you're sitting at a desk or, I mean, there are obviously like other differences, but like you just kind of go and transition into one. It's like they're trying just to make you a productive like member of society according to like what they want it to look like. So, and I think it really does start with schooling.
And of course, productivity is the same as standards. They just want you to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
In that regard, because I know you wanted to talk about more than just school. You have anti-war in your bio, and you regularly post anti-war things. I think this ties in nicely, because I grew up in a rather military environment, and I know for a fact that schools are pipelines to government institutions, not the least of which is the military. Do you think, and I've posted on this before, do you think I'm far off when I say that schools are grooming children into the cult of nationalism?
No, I don't think that you're far off. I mean, what do they start with every day? The Pledge of Allegiance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, I mean, there's a lot of state propaganda like just around because there's a flag in every classroom. They kind of are training you to not make waves and kind of just be, I mean, and even if you look at it, we would have like with third and fourth graders, we would have mock elections.
Yeah.
For like, you're going to go vote for the guy here, pick your guy or whoever, depending on what the year was, to kind of show, this is the way you're supposed to be in society. So, and try and I guess make it quote unquote fun, but.
Yeah. Well, and so that ultimately leads me into military recruitment. I think the majority of people who are recruited into the military are recruited straight out of schools. Is that far off? What was your experience in that regard?
No, I don't think you're far off at all because we would have recruiters that would come into. So I taught elementary school, so I didn't see a lot of this. But in my schooling experience from going to public school, there were recruiters that would come from different branches of the military to like talk to kids at lunch. And I think a lot of it's Tori too. Oh, well, hey, if you do this, you'll get money to go. And they talk up all the things that would be interesting to a 17 or 18-year-old because you actually can go in as long as you have your parental permission. I had a friend who did at 17. And But like, you have half those kids have no idea what they're signing up for, you know. It's just like the promise of what you could get out of it. So yeah.
Right, it's like more of a bribe environment, and it's also like, because this was the point I made in my other video about this, that kids can't consent, they can't sign, they can't go for like a fun field trip without getting parental signatures on a form. So why does anybody think these people are capable of consenting to like a pledge